Let me see your ID.
I'm working. What rule am I accused of breaking?
You need to leave and let me see your ID.
I haven't been given a lawful reason to leave. Ask anyone here if I caused
He
a
doesn't
problem.
belong here. Customers are uncomfortable.
Who complained? Point them out. I've been seated and quiet.
An entitled cafe manager thought she could turn a calm black man into a suspect just because he sat alone and didn't look right to her. What she didn't know was that the man at the table with a laptop, a legal pad, and printed case notes was a civil rights attorney who understood exactly how these situations got reported, recorded, and exposed. And she also didn't think through one simple thing. This cafe had cameras, and so did the customers. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now tell us where you're watching from, city and state. And if you like stories where people stay calm, stick to facts, and accountability actually happens, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Here's what happened in downtown Denver. Damon Price came into a co-working cafe to prep for a deposition. He picked a seat where he wouldn't be in anyone's way. He set up neatly, laptop open, legal pad beside it, and a small stack of printed case notes. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't filming content. He was doing what the room was designed for. Quiet work. Elaine Mercer, the floor manager, noticed him and kept watching him. Not because he caused a problem, but because he was alone and focused. She watched long enough that it became obvious she wasn't checking on the room. She was checking on him. She walked over and questioned why he was there, like he owed her an explanation. Damon stayed polite and kept it simple. He told her he was working. He indicated his materials. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Elaine didn't accept that answer. She pressed him again, asking for details she didn't demand from anyone else. She tried to turn it into a membership test, then a purpose test, then a who are you meeting test. Damon didn't play along. He repeated that he had access to the space and he was using it normally. Elaine walked back to the counter and made a decision that changed everything. She called 911. She reported Damon as loitering and claimed he was making customers uncomfortable. She didn't mention that he was seated and quiet. She didn't mention that no one had complained. She used vague words that made the situation sound threatening without having to describe any actual behavior. Inside the cafe, the room looked the same as it had before. People kept typing. A couple customers glanced up when they saw Elaine on the phone. Nobody moved away from Damon. Nobody acted scared. The only person treating him like a problem was Elaine. Minutes later, a city officer walked in. It was Officer Kyle Mercer. He didn't come in to sort it out. He came in acting like the call already proved something. Kyle went straight to Damon's table and treated the situation like a removal, not a conversation. Damon stayed calm and explained he was working. He pointed to his laptop and notes. He made it clear he wasn't bothering anyone and hadn't been told any valid reason he needed to leave. Kyle didn't take that in. He demanded identification and kept pushing Damon into a corner where the only right answer was leaving immediately, no matter how unreasonable the demand was. Damon asked what rule he was accused of breaking and why he was being treated like a criminal for sitting and working. Kyle dismissed it and kept escalating his tone and posture. Elaine stayed close, repeating her claim that Damon didn't belong there and that people were uncomfortable. Damon pointed out the obvious. If customers were uncomfortable, Kyle could ask them. Kyle did not. A couple nearby customers spoke up anyway and made it clear Damon had been quiet and working the whole time. One staff member behind the counter looked uneasy, like they knew the call was unnecessary, but they didn't step in against the manager. Kyle ignored the witnesses and kept the focus on Damon's compliance. That's how these situations flip. The original claim doesn't hold up, so the officer starts treating normal questions as defiance. As Kyle continued, several customers pulled out their phones and started recording. The cafe also had visible security cameras. Damon didn't do anything to provoke a reaction. He stood slowly when Kyle ordered him to, kept his hands visible, and stayed controlled. Kyle then decided to arrest him. He labeled it trespassing, even though Damon had been sitting quietly and he had not caused a disturbance. And when Damon didn't accept the story being forced onto him, Kyle added obstruction, using Damon's questions and refusal to act scared as the excuse. Damon did not resist. He did not fight. Kyle handcuffed him right there in the cafe and walked him out past the counter while people filmed and watched. Elaine got what she wanted in that moment. Damon removed in cuffs. But the cameras and the witnesses got what they needed too. Kyle walked Damon out to the curb like the decision was already sealed. Damon stayed steady, said what needed to be said, and didn't give Kyle any reaction he could later describe as aggressive. The handcuffs were still on as Kyle guided him towards the patrol car. Outside, the scene looked even worse. People on the sidewalk noticed. A couple customers from inside followed far enough to keep recording. Damon didn't ask them to stop. He also didn't ask them to help. He focused on staying calm and making sure the basics were clear. He had been working quietly in a business open to the public, and he had not caused any disturbance. Kyle put Damon near the cruiser and started doing what officers do after they take someone into custody, confirming identity, checking the call notes, and trying to build a clean story around an arrest that already had witnesses. Damon gave his name and basic identification information. He also told Kyle, clearly and professionally, that he was an attorney and that he had been in the cafe to prep for a deposition. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a fact because it was. Kyle didn't change his tone. He treated it like another excuse. Then dispatch came back over the radio. Damon's name had been run through the system. Dispatch flagged that he appeared to be a licensed attorney. That mattered for two reasons. First, it made the situation more sensitive, because any false arrest was going to be harder to hide. Second, it forced Kyle to verify the reason for removal in a way he didn't do inside the cafe. Kyle paused. His whole pace changed. He went back to the cafe entrance with Damon still in cuffs nearby and started asking questions he had refused to ask earlier. He needed something specific, a clear statement from management that Damon had been formally trespassed from the property, and a reason that didn't collapse under basic scrutiny. Elaine tried to keep control of the narrative, but now she had a problem. A vague, customers felt uncomfortable, wasn't enough when multiple customers were already on video saying there had been no issue. And if she claimed Damon had refused to leave earlier, that would raise the next question. What policy had he violated to justify removal in the first place? Kyle asked for the day pass or membership status. Staff at the counter, the ones who were actually doing the normal work, started giving answers that didn't match Elaine's urgency. Damon had been sitting quietly. Damon had not threatened anyone. Damon had not disturbed the space. Damon had been working. Kyle also had to deal with the cameras. The cafe had them. His body camera had them. And customers had their own footage starting from inside, continuing out to the sidewalk. Kyle wasn't the only one creating a record anymore. At that point, Kyle did what officers do when they realize the foundation is weak. He tried to turn it into a quick wrap it up and move on moment. He told Damon he was being released and that he needed to leave the property. Damon didn't celebrate. He didn't argue. He focused on documentation. He asked for the incident number and the reason he had been cuffed and removed. He asked for Kyle's name and badge information. He asked whether the trespass claim had been formally issued in writing or was just a manager's demand. He asked what specific behavior had been treated as obstruction. Damon kept it short and factual because he understood that every word on Kyle's body cam mattered. Kyle gave minimal answers and tried to end the interaction fast. He removed the cuffs. Damon stepped back, rubbed his wrists once, and immediately checked that his phone, wallet, and materials were still intact. Then Damon did the next important thing. He did not go quiet. He walked a few steps away from the cruiser, called someone at his firm, and explained what happened while it was fresh. He didn't dramatize it. He laid it out like a timeline. Seated and working, manager confrontation, 911 call, officer dismissal of witnesses, cuffs, removal, and sudden release only after dispatch flagged his license. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere had shifted. Customers weren't just uncomfortable anymore, they were angry. Some of them approached staff, asking why the police had been called at all. One employee looked like they wanted to disappear behind the counter. Elaine stayed rigid, acting like she'd done nothing wrong, but now she couldn't control the room. And the videos had already started moving. The first clips hit social media within hours. Short segments showed Damon seated with his work materials. Other clips showed Kyle handcuffing him. Another angle showed the walkout past the counter. People posted that Damon had done nothing, that witnesses spoke up, and that the officer ignored them. By the end of the day, the story had reached local journalists. By the next morning, longer versions were circulating with timestamps and multiple angles, including people saying on camera that no customer had complained, and the manager's claim was false. Damon's firm didn't wait for the news cycle to settle. They moved immediately to preserve evidence. They contacted the cafe demanding all security footage be saved. They prepared requests for Bodycam dispatch logs and 911 recordings. They began collecting witness names and statements from the customers who filmed. Because Damon understood something simple. If he treated it like a misunderstanding, it would be buried as one. If he treated it like a civil rights violation, it would be handled like one. The next morning, Damon's firm treated the arrest like evidence, not drama. They sent preservation notices to the cafe and the city immediately. That meant save every camera angle from inside the co-working cafe, plus the entrance and counter views. On the city side, they demanded body cam video, dispatch logs, the 911 recording, and the call notes. At the same time, they started collecting witnesses. Customers who filmed began reaching out once the clips spread. The firm took statements fast while details were still fresh. The statements were consistent. Damon had been seated, working quietly, and no one had complained. Elaine was the only person pushing the situation, and Kyle ignored people who tried to say nothing was wrong. Within days, Damon's attorneys filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. It named Officer Kyle Mercer and the city, focusing on two simple points. Damon had been arrested without a real basis, and the situation escalated because he was treated as suspicious for existing in that space, not because of any behavior. Once the lawsuit hit, Internal Affairs pulled Kyle's file. That's when it got worse for the department. Kyle didn't have a clean history. He had prior bias complaints on record, the kind that had been minimized or closed out over time. Now, those complaints were being looked at next to a viral video showing him ignore witnesses and jump straight to cuffs. The cafe's manager became a problem too. The firm demanded internal records. What policy Elaine claimed Damon violated, who authorized police calls, whether she had made similar calls before, and what staff said internally after the arrest. The cafe tried public damage control, but the video and witness statements didn't match any misunderstanding narrative. Then the body cam footage came out. It lined up with what the public had already seen. Damon calm and compliant, Kyle dismissive and escalating, and the arrest happening even though the situation didn't justify it. By then, the city wasn't just dealing with bad optics. They were dealing with a case that was becoming harder to defend every day. By the time the city understood how bad the evidence was, it was too late to shrink the story back down. The internal investigation moved fast, not because the department suddenly became brave, but because the videos forced their hand. They had multiple angles from customers, security footage from the cafe, and Kyle's body cam showing the same thing. Damon had been seated, working quietly, and the situation escalated because Elaine decided he didn't belong, and Kyle treated that like probable cause. Internal Affairs didn't just review the cafe incident. They pulled Kyle's prior record again and treated it like a pattern review, not isolated complaints. When you line up repeated bias complaints with a viral arrest that looks exactly like those complaints, the department can't keep calling it unsubstantiated without looking like it's protecting someone. Kyle was terminated. The city announced it in the careful language they always use. but the outcome was clear. He was no longer an officer. And that decision wasn't only about Damon. It was about the paper trail the city knew Damon's firm would expose and discover if the case went the distance. Elaine didn't escape it either. The cafe's corporate side stepped in once the footage made them a national headline. Elaine was removed from her position. The business also had to deal with the fact that customers no longer trusted the place as safe and professional because the public watched a manager use police like a personal security weapon. Then came the money. The city settled the civil rights case for $4 million. They didn't do that because they felt sorry. They did it because trial would have been worse. Witnesses ready to testify, video that didn't support the arrest, dispatch records showing the release happened only after Damon was flagged as a licensed attorney, and a defendant officer with prior complaints. That combination is how cities lose big in federal court. But the settlement wasn't the only consequence. The fallout forced policy changes that had been avoided for years. The department adopted reforms focused on exactly what went wrong here. Tighter rules for trespass enforcement in public-facing businesses, requiring clear documentation and verified authorization. Supervisor review requirements for certain low-level arrests tied to refusal to leave or vague suspicious person calls. Mandatory witness checks when a call is based on customers feel uncomfortable, instead of treating that phrase as automatic justification. Stronger tracking of bias complaints, so repeated patterns couldn't be quietly buried as separate incidents. Bodycam compliance and auditing, with consequences when footage and reports don't match. And the story didn't end inside Denver. The case added pressure for a wider federal review into whether the department showed a pattern of racially biased enforcement in everyday public spaces, especially in places like cafes, lobbies, co-working spaces, and retail settings where belonging gets policed through discretion. That part mattered because Damon's situation wasn't rare. What was rare was a combination of clear video, clear witnesses, and a person who knew how to force a system to answer for itself. Months later, Damon went back to work like he always had, but with one difference. His case became a reference point. Not a rumor, not a he said, she said. A documented example of what happens when a manager's bias meets an officer who doesn't verify facts. And here's the lesson. Damon didn't win because he yelled louder. He won because he stayed calm, stayed factual, and made sure the record told the truth. So let me ask you, if you were sitting in that cafe and you saw it happening, would you have spoken up, recorded, or stayed out of it? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've ever been targeted in a public space for no reason, share what happened to you. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories where accountability shows up and justice isn't just a word.
Everybody stay where you are.
That's it.
You step back.
I'm the owner. I'm a U.S. citizen. I have the employee's authorization paperwork right here.
Don't come at me with anything in your hands. Put it down.
I'm not coming at you. I'm trying to cooperate. You can look at it.
Step away from the entrance now.
I'm stepping back. Please state what you want me to do and why.
You keep talking and you'll be detained.
An ICE team showed up at a small Van Nuys shop like they already decided what the truth was. The owner, Rafi Hamadi, stayed calm, stayed on his own property, and tried to do the one thing people always say you should do: cooperate and show documents. The agents treated that as a challenge. Within minutes, Rafi was on the ground, then on the ground again, then in cuffs, telling them he was a U.S. citizen and asking for medical help after getting hurt. They kept him detained for nearly 12 hours anyway. What the agents didn't realize in that moment was that this business had surveillance cameras covering the exact angles that matter, and Rafi's family knew how to preserve footage, build a timeline, and force oversight with receipts instead of emotion. At this moment, we want to tell you we're genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Tell us where you're watching from, your state or country. And if you watch stories about accountability and people standing their ground the smart way, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's rewind, because this didn't start with a fight. It started with a normal morning that got hijacked by a federal operation moving fast and expecting everyone around them to move even faster. Rafi ran a small shop in Van Nuys that depended on routine. Open early, quick check of the register, quick check of inventory, a steady stream of customers who didn't want drama, just service. He was the type of owner who kept paperwork organized because he'd learned something the hard way. When agencies show up, they don't reward scrambling. He kept employee work authorization documents in a clean folder, separated, labeled, and ready. Not because he was scared, but because he understood how power works. People with badges love chaos, because chaos makes it easier to control the story. That morning, the first sign was the vehicles. Not one, not two, but multiple units arriving with purpose. Some of the employees noticed and froze. Customers in the lot slowed down. People always do that thing where they act like they're minding their business while they're actually watching everything. Agents moved toward the shop in a tight, confident pattern. No small talk, no easing in. The body language said this was an operation, not a conversation. They started directing people, separating the staff, asking questions in a way that made it clear they weren't there to listen. The employees looked at Rafi because that's what employees do when the room turns unfamiliar. They look for the person who owns the room. Rafi came out from behind the counter and kept his hands visible. He did not run up on anyone. He didn't touch anyone. He didn't start yelling. He did what calm people do in high-pressure moments. He tried to slow the temperature down with facts. He told them he owned the business. He told them he was a U.S. citizen. He tried to present paperwork, showing his employees work authorization. This is where the power chess started. Because the agents weren't interested in the folder. They were interested in control. A folder means the situation becomes administrative. Control means the situation stays tactical. Tactical lets them treat the environment like a threat. So their next move was framing. They started treating Rafi's presence as interference. Not because he was blocking a door, not because he was hiding anyone, but because he was insisting on being part of what was happening inside his own business. They kept pushing him back verbally, trying to isolate him from his staff, from his paperwork, from his own authority. Rafi didn't match their aggression. He didn't do what they expected him to do. He didn't escalate so they could justify an escalation. He stayed in that narrow lane that makes bullies uncomfortable, calm, clear, and refusing to disappear. That's when the physical contact happened. The first time Rafi went down, it happened fast. The kind of fast that's meant to overwhelm. A shove, a loss of balance, and the ground. Employees reacted. Customers reacted. Someone in the lot lifted a phone. Inside the shop, the security cameras kept recording because they always record. And that's the part the agents never fully account for. They think the badge controls the narrative. Cameras don't care about badges. Rafi got back up. He looked shaken, not dramatic. People who actually get hit with reality don't perform. They recalibrate. He tried again to communicate who he was and what he was holding. He asked them to look at the documents. He repeated that he was a citizen. The agents treated repetition as defiance. They tightened the circle. They raised the pressure. They repositioned around him like they were trying to make him choose between backing away from his own staff or getting labeled non-compliant. That label is a tool. Once it sticks, anything that follows can be explained as necessary. Then came the second knockdown. This one happened where more people could see it. The lot had clearer sight lines. The cameras had better angles. And because it was the second time, it didn't read like an accident. It read like a decision. Rafi hit the ground again, and this time it looked like he got hurt enough that he started asking for medical care right away. That's the moment that tells you what kind of operation you're watching, whether they pause and check on him, or whether they keep moving like the injury is just background noise. They kept moving. They put him in cuffs. They removed him from the immediate area. They continued the operation like the owner was just another obstacle they cleared. Rafi kept insisting he was a U.S. citizen. He kept trying to explain the paperwork. He kept saying he needed medical attention. None of that changed their tempo. This is also where the government's version and Rafi's version split. The government later argued that Rafi interfered with the operation. The implication was that their response was caused by his behavior. Rafi disputed that and said the surveillance footage showed he did not do what they accused him of doing. That's the key detail because it turns the story from a debate into a reviewable event. You can argue all day with a report. You can't argue with timestamps, angles, and audio. While Rafi was being held, time did what it always does in detention. It dragged. Hours without medical care feel like punishment, even when nobody calls it that. He was stuck in the system's slow lane, while the agents stayed in the fast lane. Back at the shop, the people who cared about him started switching from shock to strategy. Mina, his sister, got the call and came in hard with one goal: find out where he was and preserve everything that could get lost. She wasn't yelling at everyone. She was watching who was nervous, who was avoiding eye contact, who was suddenly acting like there was nothing to see. Because Mina understood the real fight was about to be over evidence, not volume. And at that exact moment, while the operation still had the lot tense and the employees shaken, Mina looked up at the security monitor screen and saw the camera grid still rolling. Mina didn't waste time arguing with agents about what should happen. She knew the real fight would be about what could be proven later. So while everyone else was stuck reacting, she switched into preservation mode. She went straight to the security system. Most small shops have the same setup: a DVR box in a back room, a monitor at the counter, and a default password that nobody changes until something goes wrong. Mina had changed it months ago. She had also set the system to record continuously because the shop had dealt with break-ins before. That decision mattered now. She pulled up the camera grid and checked the angles. She saw the moment Rafi went down the first time, then the second time. She saw how close he was to the agents, how his hands looked, how his body moved. She didn't need to narrate it to herself. She just needed it saved. Because here's what people don't understand until they learn the hard way. Many surveillance systems overwrite footage fast. Some do it every few days. Some do it sooner, depending on storage. If you wait, the evidence disappears without anyone deleting anything. So Mina did 3 things in order. First, she stopped anyone from touching the system. She told the employees not to mess with the monitor, not to rewind clips, not to post shaky recordings of the screen, and not to start guessing what happened out loud. She kept it businesslike. No panic, no group debate. Second, she exported the footage. Not just one clip. She pulled a full window of time. The minutes before the agents arrived, the initial contact, both takedowns, and the moment Rafi was cuffed and removed. She also exported the full parking lot view, because that's where the clearest angle was. Third, she made copies. 1 copy on a physical drive, 1 copy uploaded. And she labeled everything by date and camera angle. She also wrote down the system time and compared it to her phone time, because if the DVR clock was off by even a few minutes, the timeline would get challenged later. That's how you think when you expect people with authority to rewrite events. You build your timeline before they build theirs. While Mina was doing that, employees were calling around trying to locate Rafi. They got bounced between numbers, put on holds, and given vague answers. This part always looks the same. The person taken disappears into procedure, and the family gets treated like an inconvenience for asking basic questions. Mina kept calling anyway. She asked where he was being held. She asked for confirmation of his condition. She asked whether he'd been medically evaluated. She kept her words controlled. She did not give anyone a reason to label her hostile, and she got the same outcome over and over. No clear information and no urgency. Rafi, meanwhile, was stuck in the part of the system that runs on delays. He told them repeatedly he was a U.S. citizen. He tried to explain he was the owner and that he had documentation for the employees. He also told them he was injured and needed medical care. He wasn't asking for special treatment. He was asking for basic care after being knocked down twice. It didn't matter. Hours passed. The detention time stretched toward half a day. And the longer it went, the more the situation changed from chaotic operation into deliberate choice. Because after the initial moment, everything becomes a decision. Whether to evaluate him, whether to document injuries, whether to let him contact someone, whether to correct an obvious problem when a citizen is saying he's a citizen. When he finally got access to a phone call, the first thing he did wasn't to yell about what happened. He focused on what mattered. He told Mina where he was, that he still hadn't received medical care, and that the agents were framing him as someone who interfered. He told her they weren't treating his paperwork like evidence. They were treating it like an excuse. Mina did not respond with emotion. She responded with steps. She told him the footage was secured. She told him not to argue in circles with anyone. She told him to keep repeating the same key points: his identity, his citizenship, his injury, and his request for medical attention. She told him to ask for everything to be documented. If they refused, she told him to remember who refused. And yes, that's a harsh reality. When the system is moving against you, you start building the record while you're still inside it. By the time Rafi was released, nearly 12 hours had passed. He came out exhausted, in pain, and angry, but he kept it controlled. The first stop should have been medical. The second stop was evidence, because now there were two competing stories, and only one could survive contact with video. The government side was already taking shape around a familiar claim that Rafi interfered with an enforcement action. That's a useful claim because it's vague enough to cover a lot. It also shifts attention away from the takedowns and toward his behavior. Rafi's side was simpler. He said he didn't interfere, he said he tried to cooperate, and he said the footage showed what actually happened. Mina and Rafi met with an attorney within days, and the attorney didn't lead with outrage. He led with questions. What cameras existed? What angles? What timestamps? What audio? Who had copies? Who had access to the original system? Whether the footage had been edited? Whether the DVR clock matched real time? Whether there were witnesses with phones? Whether any neighbor businesses had cameras that caught the parking lot? This is where people start to see the difference between anger and strategy. Strategy is boring. Strategy is labeled folders, timestamps, and backup drives. Strategy is how you win against a false narrative. The attorney also told them the next stage would be predictable. Officials would speak confidently, and the public would be expected to trust the badge. So he wanted the video ready before the story hardened. And that's where the pressure shifted. Because once the footage was secured and the timeline was built, the question stopped being, what do we think happened? And became, who is willing to stand by their version after the footage is reviewed? Once the lawyer had the footage and the timeline, the case stopped being about opinions. It became a test of who was willing to keep repeating their version after hard evidence got placed in front of decision makers. The government's position stayed consistent at first. They described Rafi as someone who interfered with an enforcement operation. They leaned on the idea that agents had to act quickly for safety and control. That framing mattered because it tried to make the takedowns look like a response instead of a choice. Rafi's side didn't try to win with emotion. They moved like people who expected the system to protect itself, unless forced. The attorney's first move was to lock in the record. He had Rafi document his injuries through an exam and photographs, not for sympathy, but for time-stamped proof. He had Mina sign an affidavit describing how the footage was preserved when it was exported, and where the original DVR remained. He also collected witness names from nearby businesses and customers who had been in the lot. Then the second move. Requests and complaints that trigger oversight. They filed formal complaints that required responses. They requested detention logs showing start and end times. They requested use of force reports. They requested any body camera footage if it existed. And if it didn't, they requested the policies on recording. They requested operational notes that would show who made which decisions. That's how power chess works. You don't argue with the loudest person in the room. You pull the threads that force documentation. At the same time, they controlled the release of the surveillance video. They didn't dump it online with captions and hope people got it. They sent it to a local reporter who had a track record of getting records, not just reactions. The reporter verified timestamps, talked to witnesses, and framed the story around the gap between the official claim and what the camera showed. When the segment aired, it didn't rely on dramatic language. It relied on sequence. It showed Raffi approaching with paperwork in hand. It showed him not striking anyone. It showed him being taken down twice in a short span. It showed how quickly he went from owner trying to cooperate to detainee being removed. That put pressure on the agency in a way private complaints rarely do, because now the public could see what usually stays inside reports. The agency response shifted the way these responses often do. First firm, then careful. They emphasized ongoing review language. They avoided discussing specific tactics. They pointed back to their interference claim without relitigating details on camera. But behind the scenes, the tone changed. Because once video circulates, every supervisor knows one thing. If the footage doesn't match the written narrative, somebody becomes a liability. The attorney filed a civil suit and kept it narrow and evidence-heavy. He didn't build it around speeches. He built it around documented time, documented injury, documented detention length, and documented refusal of medical care. He framed the question in a way that put decision-makers in a corner. If a business owner repeatedly stated he was a U.S. citizen and requested medical care after being injured, what justified keeping him for nearly 12 hours without treatment? That's not a debate question. That's a record question. Depositions followed. Not dramatic ones. Just the kind where people get asked the same thing 3 different ways until the answer has to match the footage. Agents were asked to explain what they considered interference and where it appeared on video. They were asked who gave the order to detain him. They were asked why medical care wasn't provided when requested. They were asked what documentation was offered and whether it was reviewed. During this phase, the agency's story hit a problem that happens a lot when video exists. The big claim becomes hard to defend in small details. People can say, he interfered. It's harder to point to the exact moment and make it match the camera. The case didn't turn into a public trial spectacle. It turned into a quiet pressure campaign built on paperwork, evidence, and risk. And then came the outcome everyone claims never happens until it does. The agency moved towards settlement discussions. They did not frame it as wrongdoing. They framed it as resolution. That's how systems protect themselves while still paying the price. Raffi's side pushed for 2 things: compensation that acknowledged harm, and changes that reduced the chance of repeat behavior. The money mattered because injury and detention have consequences. But the changes mattered because Raffi didn't want this to just be a payout with no lesson. The settlement terms stayed controlled, like most do, but the practical consequences were real. Raffi received compensation. His attorney fees were covered. The agency faced internal review pressure, including scrutiny of how interference was being used as a catch-all label. The local field office tightened procedures around medical evaluation requests during detentions. And the biggest change wasn't even formal policy. The biggest change was awareness. Business owners in the area started upgrading cameras. They started backing up footage off-site. They started writing down badge numbers and vehicle plates when something felt off. They shared attorney contacts like people share emergency numbers. Not because they wanted conflict, but because they understood the rule. If you can't prove it, it didn't happen in the system's eyes. Raffi didn't turn into a public figure chasing attention. He stayed a business owner, but he did start doing one simple thing every month. He hosted a short after-hours session for nearby shops about documentation and evidence preservation. No politics, no speeches, just practical steps. Mina ran those sessions like a manager, not an activist. She taught people how to export footage properly, how to label it, how to preserve the original file, and how to avoid accidentally destroying metadata. She reminded them that phones help, but fixed cameras win cases. Months later, the shop was steady again. Rafi still had the same work ethic. What changed was his certainty. He understood that compliance alone doesn't protect you. Preparation does, and that's the real lesson here. If authority decides you're a problem, your calm won't stop them from pushing. Your paperwork won't matter if they refuse to look. The only thing that consistently forces accountability is a record that holds up under review. So let me ask you, if you were in Rafi's position, would you have known what to save, who to call, and what to document while the situation was still unfolding? And if you've ever been in a situation where someone in power tried to rewrite what happened, tell your story in the comments. Somebody reading it needs that roadmap. If you want more story times where the truth wins because somebody stayed calm and kept receipts, hit like, share this with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
All right, hold up. I need to see your ID.
Here's my identification. If you need confirmation, you can verify it through your normal channels.
That doesn't mean anything to me right now. You're being detained while we sort this out.
I already gave you ID.
Verification is one call. Hands where I can see them.
An ICE agent thought he could turn an anonymous tip into a quick parking lot detention, even after the man calmly showed valid ID and gave his name. What he did not know was that the person he was brushing off in that Arlington, Virginia supermarket lot was a federal judge, and every second of the decision-making was being recorded on body cameras. And before this hour was over, one phone call was going to lock the evidence down so tight that nobody could misplace a thing. We're genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you like stories where receipts beat power plays, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now rewind. It started with an anonymous tip that sounded confident but stayed vague. ICE agent Reed Malloy already had a file open on someone else, and the tip suggested a match would be in the area. Malloy treated it like a green light instead of a lead that needed careful verification. He pulled his team together fast. Connor Vance, Maya Sterling, and Lucas Boone. All of them wore body cameras. That mattered because this was one of those situations where the first bad decision caused every decision after it. Late afternoon in Arlington looked normal. People moved in and out of the supermarket with carts. Cars rolled through the lot slow, looking for spots. Nobody expected a federal enforcement team to step into that everyday flow and start treating a regular customer like a target. Judge Malcolm Reeves had just finished shopping. He was a black man in regular clothes, loading bags into his car, focused on leaving like everyone else. He was not doing anything that stood out. He was not hiding. He was not running. He was just moving through a normal day. Malloy's team approached with purpose and tight spacing, the kind of posture that signals the outcome is already decided. Malloy took the lead and started questioning Reeves based on the tip. Reeves did not argue. He did not escalate. He identified himself and produced valid ID, the kind of ID that should have triggered a routine verification step and a short pause. That pause never happened. Malloy looked at the ID and treated it like an inconvenience. He made the choice that would define everything. Detention first, verification later. He acted like compliance meant surrender, and like verification was something Reeves had to earn. Reeves stayed calm and kept his responses clean and consistent. He made it clear he was willing to cooperate, but he also made it clear that a basic identity check was available through normal channels. This is where the power chess started. Malloy tried speed and pressure. He used urgency to cut off questions and to keep his team moving in one direction. Connor Vance backed the momentum, positioning close enough to remove space. Lucas Boone stayed procedural on the surface, focused on commands and steps, but every step kept Reeves from slowing the situation down. Maya Sterling saw the ID and hesitated, but she did not override the leader. She did what a lot of people do inside a chain of command. She watched a bad call turn into a bigger one and didn't stop it. Reeves kept his voice level. He did not match their tone. He did not give them an excuse. He did what experienced people do when they realize the other side is committed to escalation. He stayed steady. He repeated the facts. and he made sure the record was clear on what he was offering and what they were refusing. And the body cameras captured the key failures in real time. They captured that Reeves presented valid identification. They captured Malloy brushing past it. They captured the refusal to slow down and verify through routine channels. They captured the shift from a stop into a detention that was not necessary if verification was the real goal. People in the parking lot noticed. Some slowed down. A couple of shoppers stared. One bystander lifted a phone and started recording from a distance. That mattered too, because public space has its own accountability when official accountability fails. Malloy pushed the situation into detention anyway. Reeves was treated like the tip was proof instead of a prompt to check. The team controlled his movement, controlled the pace, and controlled his access to the one tool that would have changed everything immediately, his phone. Reeves requested a call. It was delayed. Time dragged, not because verification was hard, but because Malloy acted like verification was optional. Then the verification finally happened. When the routine channels were finally used, the result landed fast and clean. Reeves's identity was confirmed. The temperature shifted right there, not because the detention was suddenly wrong, but because the detained person suddenly had status they could not ignore. This is the exact concrete moment where Tessa Langford entered the story. The minute Reeves was confirmed and finally allowed a call, his phone access was restored. Reeves called Langford immediately and gave her what mattered: the time, the exact location, the agent names, and the most important detail of all for a case like this, the detail that decides whether truth survives the next week. The body cameras were running. Langford did not waste the call on comfort. She treated it like an evidence rescue. Within that same hour, she sent a preservation and litigation hold notice to ICE leadership and agency counsel. Not vague, not polite, specific and immediate. She demanded the original body camera files and metadata be preserved without alteration, including upload and doc logs. She demanded dispatch and CAD records. She demanded tip intake notes. She demanded any facility video tied to Reeves's detention be frozen. She also moved on the supermarket angle right away, requesting their security footage before it could be overwritten. And she started securing witness phone videos before people got nervous or files disappeared. Tessa Langford moved like someone who had seen evidence disappear before. Within the same hour of Reeves getting his phone back, she sent a preservation and litigation hold notice straight to ICE leadership and agency counsel. She did not write it like a suggestion. She wrote it like a clock was already ticking on automatic deletions, overwrite cycles, and quiet technical errors. She demanded the original body camera files from Reed Malloy, Connor Vance, Maya Sterling, and Lucas Boone, including full-length recordings, not shortened exports. She demanded the metadata that proved when the cameras started, when they stopped, and whether anything had been trimmed. She demanded the upload and doc logs that showed exactly when those files were ingested into the system, from which device, and by which user account. She demanded dispatch and CAD records that captured who was contacted, what was said, and when verification was finally requested. She demanded tip intake notes and any internal record of the anonymous tip that started the stop. She demanded any facility video that showed Reeves after the parking lot, including hallways, intake areas, and holding spaces. And then she did the part most people forget. She went outside the agency. Langford contacted the supermarket's management and corporate office and requested immediate preservation of all exterior camera angles facing the parking lot, entrances, and cart corrals, with special focus on the time window Reeves gave her. She pushed hard on retention reality, because many systems overwrote in days, not months. She made it clear she was not asking them to review or edit anything, just to freeze it and preserve it in an original form. At the same time, she started collecting witnesses before fear and second thoughts kicked in. Reeves had seen at least one bystander filming. Langford had him describe where that person was standing, what they looked like, and which direction they left. She then reached out through local community channels in the store's public-facing contact points to locate anyone who recorded the stop. She also instructed her team to canvass the lot quickly, asking store employees and nearby shoppers whether they saw the detention and whether anyone took video. This was not dramatic. It was practical. Digital evidence had a short life when nobody locked it down. While Langford's emails and notices were landing, Malloy was trying to put the incident back in a box. He knew enough to understand what it meant to detain a federal judge after a valid ID had been shown. He started building a justification narrative immediately. He leaned on the anonymous tip. He leaned on the idea that a name could be faked. He leaned on officer discretion. He leaned on language like safety concerns and uncertainty. But the body cameras had already captured the part that mattered most. The moment the easy verification option was available, and he refused to take it. Inside the team, the dynamic tightened. Connor Vance backed Malloy's posture, treating it like a weather event they all had to get through together. Lucas Boone focused on process and avoided personal responsibility, acting like he was just following steps. Maya Sterling looked like someone who knew it went too far, but she still did not break away from the leader's version of events. Langford anticipated all of that. Her notice did not just ask for video. It demanded associated records that would prevent storytelling later. Logs, timestamps, account activity, chain of custody documentation. Anything that made it harder for someone to claim a file was corrupted or incomplete or accidentally overwritten. She also asked for internal communications tied to the incident. Supervisor calls, emails, text messages on agency systems, and any after-action notes. Not because she expected immediate cooperation, but because she needed a paper trail showing she demanded preservation before anything could be lost. Reeves, meanwhile, stayed disciplined. He did not go online and vent. He did not call friends to spread it. He documented what happened while it was still fresh. Time markers, location points in the lot, the order of agent actions, and the exact moment verification was finally performed. He understood that memory got attacked later, and clean notes helped neutralize that. Then the outside pressure arrived anyway. One witness clip hit social media that evening. It did not show every detail, but it showed enough to make people ask the obvious question. Why was a calm man being detained after showing ID? Comment sections filled up fast. People shared their own stories. Others demanded to know the agents' names. The clip created the one thing agencies hated when they were trying to handle it internally: public time pressure. That same night, Langford's office started receiving calls from journalists and community advocates who had seen the video and connected it to Reeves's name. She kept it controlled. She did not overtalk. She confirmed only what helped lock the record into place: that there was body cam footage, that preservation demands had been sent, and that the matter would be handled through formal legal channels. By the next morning, the story had two tracks forming at the same time. The civil track moved first. Reeves authorized Langford to draft the complaint for unlawful detention and civil rights violations. The claim was simple in structure and strong, in fact. Valid identification was presented, verification was available, and detention was chosen anyway. The harm was not just embarrassment. It was the misuse of federal power in a public space. The second track started quieter but heavier. Once the preservation notice hit ICE leadership and counsel, it triggered internal attention they could not ignore. People inside the agency started asking for summaries. Supervisors wanted to know why verification was delayed. Counsel wanted to know what the body cam showed, not what Malloy said they showed. And this is where Malloy made the worst possible move for his own future. Instead of admitting the basic truth, he committed to his written version of events. He wrote reports and statements that tried to make the detention sound inevitable and reasonable. He tried to make the ID moment sound uncertain. He tried to make Reeves sound less cooperative than he actually was. Langford did not need to guess. She already had the blueprint. Compare Malloy's words to the cameras, to the logs, and to the dispatch timeline. By the end of that week, Reeves and Langford filed the civil lawsuit. It landed like a clean, formal document, but it described something simple. Malloy's team had approached Reeves on a vague tip. Reeves had identified himself and presented valid ID, and Malloy had chosen detention instead of verification. The filing focused on decision points, not feelings. It treated the parking lot stop like a timeline problem with a civil rights consequence. Langford also moved fast to keep the evidence from being summarized into something safer. She pushed for early court involvement on preservation and demanded production in an original form. That meant the body cam footage had to be the full recordings, with metadata intact, not trimmed clips with missing timestamps. She demanded the doc logs to show when uploads happened and whether anyone accessed or copied files after the incident became sensitive. She demanded dispatch records to prove how long verification was delayed and who finally made the call to confirm his identity. She demanded the tip intake notes because the stop started there, and vague tips often got cleaned up after the fact. Inside ICE, the atmosphere changed from field confidence to administrative panic. Leadership wanted to know why a simple identity check wasn't done immediately once ID was shown. Agency counsel asked for internal summaries, but Langford's hold notice made one thing clear. If anyone altered or lost records after being told to preserve them, that became its own problem. Malloy tried to protect himself with paperwork. He doubled down on the version of events that made him look reasonable. He framed the ID as uncertain. He described Reeves as less cooperative than the video showed. He claimed time pressure and safety concerns justified going hands-on and restricting phone access. But the cameras did not match his story. And that mismatch is what opened the second track in a way Malloy couldn't talk his way out of. Once the body cam files and logs were preserved, a referral went out beyond the agency. Federal prosecutors began reviewing the footage alongside Malloy's reports and statements. They treated it like a credibility test with real stakes. If an officer's written narrative contradicted clear video, that wasn't a training issue anymore. Prosecutors built the comparison the way they always do in cases like this. Witness material tightened the picture. The supermarket's exterior cameras confirmed positions and timing in the lot. Witness phone videos captured tone and the pacing of commands, making it harder to pretend the detention was calm and routine. Dispatch records showed exactly when verification was finally requested, proving it was always available. With that, Malloy lost the ability to argue that the truth was unclear. By the time the first hearings in the civil case were getting scheduled, the criminal side had already turned serious. Prosecutors weren't just looking at a bad stop. They were looking at whether a federal agent unlawfully detained someone, and then tried to justify it with statements that didn't match recorded reality. And Malloy's team could feel the shift. Connor Vance stayed close to Malloy's line, but the pressure started to show. Lucas Boone leaned harder into procedure, acting like policy language could shield him from what the cameras captured. Maya Sterling became the quiet hinge point because the footage showed she had seen the ID and the refusal to slow down. The criminal case moved faster than people expected because it didn't depend on opinions. It depended on comparisons. Prosecutors took the preserved body cam footage, the metadata, the doc upload logs, the dispatch timeline, and the tip intake record, and they lined them up against Malloy's written reports and later statements. The core issue wasn't complicated. The video showed Reeves presenting valid ID and offering routine verification options, and it showed Malloy choosing detention anyway. Then Malloy's paperwork tried to make that moment sound uncertain and justified. That gap is what prosecutors built around. They treated it as a pattern: detention-first decision-making, refusal to verify when verification was available, and then statements that didn't match recorded reality. Once the evidence package was locked down early, there wasn't room for missing footage arguments, or convenient technical problems. Charges were filed. The case went forward, and Malloy's defense couldn't out-talk his own camera. The conviction landed, and Malloy was sentenced to prison. Connor Vance, Maya Sterling, and Lucas Boone didn't carry the same criminal outcome in the way Malloy did, but the footage still reached them where it hurt. Their actions were documented, reviewable, and tied to policy failures that leadership could no longer deny. At the same time, the civil case kept moving on its own track. Reeves's lawsuit didn't stop just because the criminal case ended. It pressed the broader point. This didn't become wrong only when the agents learned who Reeves was. It was wrong the moment a calm person presented valid ID and the team decided detention was the default. By the end, Reeves got something most people never get in situations like this: a complete record, proven contradictions, real accountability, and rule changes that outlived the headlines. If Langford hadn't moved in that first hour, this could have turned into a vague internal review with no clean evidence left to test the truth. If you were Reeves, would you have known what to document, who to call, and what to preserve? And if you've ever been in a situation where someone with authority tried to rush you into silence, share what happened in the comments. If you want more stories where calm, preparation, and receipts beat power plays like the video, subscribe, and send this to someone who needs the reminder that verification is not optional when rights are on the line.
ID, let me see it.
Am I being detained? What's the reason you need my ID?
Don't do that, just hand it over.
What is the legal reason you need it?
We got a call, you match the description.
What description? What crime was reported?
Step away from the vehicle.
A Waukegan officer tried to turn the CVS parking lot on Route 41 into a street checkpoint. He demanded a black man's ID like it was mandatory. And the second the man asked basic questions, the officer treated it like defiance. What the officer didn't know was that the man standing by his car was a Marine veteran who stayed calm under pressure and knew exactly what his rights were. And the bigger problem for the officer was simple. Everything was being recorded, from the body camera to the CVS cameras to the phones that came up the moment his tone changed. At this moment, we want to tell you we're grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Quick thing, tell us where you're watching from, state or country. And if you like stories where calm, documentation, and accountability beat ego and abuse of power, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now back to what happened. The officer stood close enough to control the space. He repeated the ID demand, fast and sharp, like he wanted a yes or no outcome, not a conversation. The man, Andre Ellis, stayed steady beside his car. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step toward the officer. He kept his hands visible and asked the only questions that mattered: whether he was being detained and what the legal reason was. That was the point where the officer decided Andre wasn't being cooperative, even though Andre wasn't refusing to help. Andre was refusing to be bullied. The officer shifted his wording. He started describing Andre's questions as arguing. He started stacking commands. He ordered Andre to move away from the vehicle, even though Andre wasn't doing anything with the vehicle. He warned Andre about consequences without explaining the actual basis for the stop. His hand hovered near his cuffs, like he wanted the moment to look dangerous on camera. Andre didn't give him that. Andre had just come out of CVS with a small bag and a receipt. His keys were in his hand. The car was right there. Nothing about the scene matched the officer's urgency. The officer claimed there had been a call and that Andre matched a description. He didn't give details that would make it believable. No clear description, no location direction, no specific crime. Just a vague justification that gets used when someone wants an excuse to stop somebody. And this part mattered because this wasn't a random location. Along Route 41, the same commercial lots kept showing up in complaint stories from Black residents. People talked about being questioned for standing near their own cars, waiting for rides, picking up prescriptions, or just existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. A local advocate had been collecting names and dates because a pattern only gets taken seriously when it's documented. Andre knew about that reputation. He wasn't trying to perform for anyone. He was trying to stay safe and keep the situation clean, because he understood how quickly an officer could twist body language into a narrative. As the officer got louder, people started paying attention. A couple walking in slowed down. A man near the edge of the lot turned towards the sound. Near the entrance, the assistant manager, Tanya Patel, watched because she could tell this wasn't a quick question and go. She wasn't interfering. She was tracking what was happening and where the cameras were pointed, because she knew how often stores get pulled into these situations after the fact. Phones started going up, one, then two, then more. The officer noticed. Instead of calming down, he got more controlling. He leaned into the authority tone. He framed Andre as suspicious because Andre didn't instantly hand over identification on demand. He implied that a person with nothing to hide would never ask questions. Andre stayed focused. He kept his hands visible. He didn't reach into pockets. He didn't step closer. He repeated that he was willing to cooperate once the officer explained the reason for the stop. That's the power chess game right there. Some officers don't want compliance. They want submission. They want a person to accept being treated like a suspect with no cause, because once that becomes normal, it keeps happening to the next person. Then the officer made a mistake that cameras love. He started talking like this was routine at that CVS lot, like he regularly checked certain people there. He didn't say it as a specific response to a specific call. He said it like a habit, like a pattern. Andre clocked it immediately and pointed out calmly that the officer was describing a routine practice, not a real reason tied to Andre in that moment. The officer felt the control slipping, so he moved closer and threatened detention if Andre didn't comply. He shifted his stance like he was preparing to grab Andre, even though Andre still hadn't done anything that justified hands-on force. Tanya watched Andre's hands, still visible. She watched the officer's hands, ready. And the body camera kept capturing every choice, every escalation, every line that showed what this was really about. Then the radio crackled. Dispatch came back with information that didn't line up with the officer's claim. Andre didn't celebrate, he didn't taunt, he just stayed steady because he understood something important. When an officer gets caught in a lie in real time, the next move is usually damage control, not honesty. The radio update cut straight through the officer's story. Dispatch came back with details that didn't match what he had implied. And in that one moment, the situation changed from a street-side power play into a documented problem. Andre stayed still and kept his hands visible. He didn't try to win the moment. He let the facts do the work. The officer didn't back off. He doubled down. He started talking faster and louder, trying to rebuild authority with pressure instead of reason. He repeated the ID demand again and framed Andre's calm questions as refusal. He shifted his feet to block Andre's path, not because Andre was trying to leave aggressively, but because the officer wanted control of movement on camera. Andre didn't get pulled into it. He kept the same tone and asked for the legal basis, and then asked for a supervisor. He also asked for the officer's name and badge number, because he knew how quickly reports get written to match an officer's emotions. That supervisor request is where the officer's ego spiked. He warned Andre about being detained for not cooperating, even though Andre had been cooperating in the only way that keeps people safe in these situations. Calm, visible hands, clear questions, and no sudden movements. The officer moved one step closer and made it clear he was considering cuffs. Phones were already up. The crowd wasn't huge, but it was enough. And the CVS entrance was right there, with Tanya watching and tracking the time because she understood something most witnesses understand now. Footage without a timestamp and a location becomes easy to dismiss later. The officer called for another unit. While they waited, he tried the usual tricks. He implied Andre was hiding something. He hinted at searching the car. He talked like Andre's refusal to hand over ID instantly meant Andre had done something wrong. Andre didn't argue every sentence. He didn't debate. He repeated the same points, No threats, no crime, no reason given, and he wanted a supervisor present before anything went further. Then the officer let the mask slip again, not with a dramatic outburst, but with a casual comment that sounded like routine bias. He talked about how he had to deal with people like Andre at that exact lot all the time, as if the location itself justified treating black customers as suspects. Andre clocked it. He pointed out that the officer was describing a habit, not a specific reason. That's when the officer tried to flip the narrative, and he stepped to Andre's side like he was about to take control, and he described Andre's steady posture as aggressive body language. The body camera captured that moment, too, the gap between what the officer claimed and what Andre was actually doing. A second squad car pulled in. Sergeant Dana Kruger got out and walked up with that look supervisors have when they already know the vibe is wrong. She asked what the stop was for. The officer tried to summarize it in vague terms, leaning hard on the idea of a call and suspicious behavior. Kruger asked for specifics. The officer didn't have them. Kruger looked at Andre. Andre kept it simple and factual. He explained he had come out of CVS, had his receipt, had been standing by his car, and had asked for the reason for the stop. He also told her calmly that he was a Marine veteran and he understood his rights, and he had not consented to any search or detention without a lawful reason. Kruger checked with dispatch herself. The gap got wider. The officer tried one last move. He suggested Andre should just hand over ID to make it easy. Kruger didn't play along. She asked the officer directly what crime he suspected and what legal standard he was relying on. There was no clean answer, because there wasn't one. Now the officer had a problem. Back down in front of witnesses, or keep escalating and create something he could justify later. The fact that a supervisor was there made the second option riskier. He pivoted to saving face. He started talking about giving Andre a warning or telling him to leave or not come back to the lot. He tried to turn a public business parking lot into a personal move-along order. Kruger shut that down, too. She made it clear Andre was free to go and that there was no lawful basis to detain him. She directed the officer to disengage. Andre didn't taunt. He didn't do a victory lap. He did what disciplined people do in these moments. He ended it clean. He walked to his driver's door, still slow, still visible hands. And before he got in, he told Kruger he wanted the incident number and the officer's identifying information for a formal complaint. He also made it clear, without raising his voice, that multiple recordings existed and his receipt timestamp matched everything. The officer stood there tight-faced, watching Andre leave like it wasn't over, but it was over in the parking lot. It wasn't over on paper. That night, Andre didn't post an emotional rant. He built a timeline. He saved the receipt. He wrote down the exact location, the time, the unit numbers he remembered, the supervisor's name, and what the officer had said about always checking people like him there. He also got the name of Tanya Patel from someone who pointed her out as the manager watching from the door. The next day, Andre made 2 calls. One was to the department's complaint line. The other was to Reverend Lionel Brooks, because Brooks had been collecting stories from black residents for months. Names, dates, arrest outcomes, and the same officer showing up again and again in the background of those stories. Brooks listened to Andre's timeline and did what he always did. He compared it against his records. Same location pattern. Same style of vague justification. Same escalation when someone asked basic questions. Same officer. Brooks also knew the difference between a single bad stop and a documented pattern. Patterns are what get outside agencies to move. Tanya, meanwhile, pulled the store footage and preserved it. She didn't hand it out like gossip. She saved it like evidence because she had seen enough over the years to know that the truth disappears when nobody protects it. Within a week, Andre's body camera request was in motion, and the community complaints list grew. People started coming forward quietly first, then louder, when they realized Andre wasn't the only one. Some talked about being stopped for matching a description that never existed. Others talked about arrests that got tossed out later with no apology. And then one clip hit the public. Not because Andre was chasing viral attention, but because once enough people filed complaints, a local reporter started asking questions. And someone realized the body camera didn't make the officer look justified. It made him look reckless. The video showed the tone shift. It showed the officer treating questions like defiance. It showed the vague call story falling apart. And it showed how quickly the situation would have turned physical if Andre had panicked. Once the footage hit the public, Waukegan PD lost the ability to control the story with a press statement and a promise to review it. It wasn't just one clip. It was the pattern people recognized immediately. Same location, same vague justification, same tone shift when someone asked basic questions, and the same officer treating a normal question like a challenge to his authority. Andre stayed quiet publicly at first. He didn't do interviews chasing attention. He did documentation. He handed over his timeline, the receipt timestamp, and the names of witnesses who could confirm what happened before the cameras even became the main point. Reverend Lionel Brooks did what he had been building toward for months. He put Andre's incident next to other reports and showed how the same officer's stops followed the same blueprint. Lots of suspicious person language, lots of people matching descriptions that never got clarified, and too many black residents describing the same outcome: threats of detention, pressure for ID, and arrests that went nowhere later. That's when the federal involvement became real. Special Agent Miguel Ortega didn't show up with speeches. He showed up with requests: the Bodycam archive, dispatch logs, CAD entries, any records of a call that supposedly triggered the stop, prior arrest reports written by Officer Brett Halverson, complaints, supervisor notes, use of force reports, even the activation history of Halverson's camera, because patterns show up in what gets recorded and what conveniently doesn't. AUSA Naomi Lerner didn't need Andre to sound emotional. She needed consistency, and the evidence had it. The first problem was simple. The justification for stopping Andre didn't hold up when dispatch logs were pulled. The timing didn't match the story Halverson tried to build in the lot. The call narrative looked more like a cover than a reason. The second problem was worse. Halverson's history didn't look like normal policing. When the stop data was reviewed, his numbers stood out. Not because he was proactive in a balanced way, but because his stops of black residents were disproportionately high compared to other officers working the same shifts in the same areas. His reports used the same phrases over and over, and multiple incidents ended the same way: intense escalation, then charges dropped or cases dismissed later. Federal investigators also looked at prior arrests that community members had been talking about for a long time. The ones that ended with nothing but stress, legal bills, lost work hours, and a record that still created problems, even after charges were dropped. Several of those arrests came back to the same issue. The initial detention didn't have a clear lawful basis, and the report language looked designed to justify the detention after the fact. That's how a single parking lot encounter turns into a civil rights file. Because it isn't treated as a one-off attitude problem. It's treated as a repeat practice. Tanya Patel's role mattered more than she expected. She preserved the CVS footage with timestamps and provided it through the proper channels. Her footage didn't just show the confrontation. It showed what happened right before it, including Andre's calm movements, how the officer approached, and how quickly the officer escalated without a clear reason. It helped eliminate the usual excuses that officers lean on later. Sergeant Dana Kruger got interviewed too. Supervisors always do. And this is where departments get uncomfortable, because pattern cases don't just ask what one officer did. They ask who saw it and what they did about it. Kruger didn't have the luxury of pretending she never noticed Halverson's style. Investigators asked about prior complaints and how they were handled. They asked whether Halverson had been counseled, whether discipline was recommended, and whether anything changed. Inside the department, Internal Affairs opened a formal case. That process moved fast, not because departments are always eager, but because federal eyes change the incentives. The body cam footage, dispatch contradictions, and witness recordings made it hard to stall. Halverson's response followed the usual path. He claimed he felt threatened. He claimed Andre's questions were non-compliance. He claimed he was acting on a call. But when investigators asked for details that could be verified, the story didn't stay stable. And that's what ended him. The department terminated Halverson. Not with a quiet transfer, not with paid leave, until the public moved on. Terminated. But the bigger accountability didn't stop at the job. The Federal Review didn't treat the footage as an embarrassing moment. It treated it as evidence of discriminatory policing. Andre's case became a reference point for reviewing Halverson's prior stops and arrests. And that review had real outcomes. Some residents received formal letters acknowledging improper actions tied to Halverson's reports. Several cases were re-examined for civil rights violations. In at least a few situations, the city moved towards settlements, rather than risk litigation that would put years of stop patterns and internal handling under a microscope. Andre didn't get rich. That's not how this usually works. What he got was something more important to him. Public confirmation that he wasn't the problem, and proof that staying calm and documented made it impossible to rewrite what happened. He also became a quiet bridge for other residents. Not as a hero, not as a professional activist, but as someone who knew how to organize facts and keep people focused on evidence, not emotion. He helped people request footage, log dates, and file complaints the right way. Waukegan PD had to change procedures too, because the department couldn't act like this was only about one officer's attitude. They tightened ID demand rules in practice, not just on paper. They enforced body cam activation with real discipline. Supervisors were required to respond faster to escalating street encounters. Stop data reporting became more transparent. Officers received updated training on lawful detentions and how quickly biased assumptions turn into unlawful actions. And the CVS lot on Route 41 became something it should have been the whole time, a place where people could pick up prescriptions and go home without being treated like suspects. In the end, the lesson wasn't complicated. Andre won because he didn't panic, didn't perform, and didn't give the officer an excuse. He stayed calm, stayed factual, and let cameras and records do what they do best: lock the truth in place. Now let me ask you something. If you were Andre, would you have stayed that calm? Or would the officer's tone have pulled you into an argument? And if you were watching from that parking lot, would you have recorded or would you have looked away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've been through something like this, share your experience so other people know they aren't alone. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story with someone who needs to hear it, because we bring you real, grounded stories where dignity and documentation lead to accountability.